Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and my guest today is Megan Bryant. Megan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. Megan was recommended by a listener friend, and let me tell you a little bit about her. So Megan Bryant created and directs Idaho's first comedy festival. It's called the Idaho Laugh Fest. She also runs a company called Zip Zap Zop. That's with her brother, and they do team building events using improv to enhance human communication and connection. So that's totally cool. I love this whole theme of comedy. It's totally out of my, like, if you ask me to be funny, I will fall flat. I got nothing. So it's so cool to hear someone who is able to do that and who has that talent. Megan also is an author. And tell me the full title of your book.
So the title of the book is Not My Plan, Sucking It In Till I Had to Push It Out.
Okay. And that is a book about a hidden teenage pregnancy, which we will talk about. And she is the mother of 4 young children. So that is quite the intro. And like I said, I mean, something that totally is, you know, for me, and I bet for a lot of people, comedy is something we enjoy, but that we don't feel like is, you know, something we could do. I admire people so much who, like you, can get up on the stage. I was watching some of your videos. I mean, to be able to get up on a stage and people watch you and expect you to be funny, like, that's a lot of pressure. I'm amazed by that talent. So
it's a little scary.
Yeah, it seems like it would be. And you teach others things like that too. So that's so cool. So let's start. We want to hear about all of that and your work with comedy, but let's start with your backstory. So kind of going through your teens and your book. So you call it your hidden teenage pregnancy. Let's start there.
All right. Yeah, that's a great place to start. First of all, I don't ever recommend hiding a pregnancy. It's just not a fun thing to do. But, you know, I had a pretty average childhood and really happy and outgoing type of person. And once I stumbled upon the situation that, you know, I was a little boy crazy, and I had a boyfriend I was particularly boy crazy about. So once I realized I had found myself in that realm, you know, everything changes and everybody has experiences, obviously, that become really pivotal and deeply affects the way that we function in life. Well, for me, it was suddenly having this responsibility for another life that I had not intended on creating. But really early into it, I just was like, I knew there was like a bigger purpose, which was kind of overwhelming to be really scared and not want to tell anyone because I grew up in a very religious background. I'm actually, and I still am currently an active member of the Latter-day Saints. I'm a Mormon. So, you know, it's like having, like with anything, having that shame and the guilt and the panic and all those things. And I had told my friends when I first had actually let them know that I had had sex, and they're like, "What?" One of them totally ripped me a new one, and so I was like, "I need help!" Like I was panicked, and I'm like, "What do I do? I feel terrible." And then once I realized I was pregnant, then there was no way I was going to tell anyone because I had already had my whole, you know, my soul chewed apart by just the original confession. So it was kind of crazy. My life went from being very crazy and outgoing and doing all the activities in high school. I was a member of like tons of different clubs and in choirs and like theater performance and all that fun stuff. And everything changed there on the home stretch. I graduated 5 months pregnant and still lived at home with my family and shared a room with my older sister and slept on the top bunk all the way through the time I had the baby. But yeah, it was wild. It just, things happened, and then I just like embraced it and didn't really know how to get through it, but just kind of took everything a day at a time.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about, so how far along were you when you found out you were pregnant?
Well, honestly, the time that the act happened, you know, in my boyfriend's parents' basement, I remember thinking, like, I went into the bathroom to kind of regroup and collect myself. And I remember looking in the mirror and feeling like, oh my gosh, like I could feel something had changed. And I was like, I could have gotten pregnant right now. So I like right in that moment, I thought it was a very real possibility. And I remember having a very calm feeling, which was eerie at the time, just that I was like, whoa, something is crazy that's happening. But then I like, of course, went into denial. I'm like, no, there's no way this won't be me. This won't be a problem. It's going to be okay. But then, I missed 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 periods before I was finally like, oh, okay, I probably should come to grips when, I started to feel flutterings in my belly. And I'm like, I was in major denial though. So I never actually even took a pregnancy test until I finally, could actually feel the baby and really needed to face the reality that it was definitely a pregnancy.
Wow. So, okay, when did you end up telling your parents? I assume that's the first. Well, probably you first told your boyfriend. Tell us who you told first and when that came out.
I told my boyfriend pretty early on, probably after I don't even remember for sure. He probably would. He has a iron memory, and we actually are still friends all these years later. So it would have been early on within the first couple of months. And then I didn't tell anyone else ever until the baby was born. So I had late 90s fashion working for me. So I was wearing baggy clothes. I literally sucked it in. Like, mind over matter for me, I realized is a very real thing. And when you're young and agile, like I sucked in from the moment I suspected I might be. And I know that probably sounds totally crazy, but I just wore the baggiest clothes I could to work. And I hid from my friends and family by working 2 full-time jobs and was gone before anyone woke up and was home after everybody was asleep, and really just avoided people once it got to the point where I felt like I was looking poochy. And it was within like the last couple of weeks, I actually had even enrolled in college. I had gone to college for 3 weeks at Boise State University before I went into labor and finally had the baby. But like, some people were just kind of getting suspicious, like looking like I was gaining weight and worried about my health, and my personality had really tanked, and I was really bummed out all the time. And nobody understood exactly what was going on. They just knew something was different. And, but yeah, I waited until like, I didn't know how, but I was like, I'm going to get through this by myself somehow. And when I finally went into labor, my parents were out of town. I finally woke up my sister, who was, still sleeping in the bedroom we were sharing after I'd been in labor for several hours and just curled up on the hallway floor. And I finally was like, I need to go to the hospital. And she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'm having a baby. And she like almost fell down the stairs. We were like right at the top of the stairs. And she's like, what? So, and then she's like, how, suddenly she's like, how did I not know? And, we're in triage. We barely make it to the hospital because neither of us had our glasses on and we're both blind. So we're like, well, how do we even get to the hospital? But luckily we got there, and she's like staring at this like now huge and exposed belly in triage as they're like figuring out, bringing everyone up to speed. And I remember the look on her face was just like bugged eyes and staring, and just like, she could not believe it. And then called my boyfriend to come down to the hospital, and called my parents who were out of town. And she's like, you guys should come home. Megan's in the hospital. But she didn't want to freak him out, so she didn't tell him why. So it was just crazy. It all unfolded that day that she was born, and even called the adoption agency for the first time from the hospital. We're like, we have a baby that's already born. And it was crazy. Totally crazy.
Wow. That is totally crazy. I'm even surprised because, okay, I thought your book title meant like a mostly hidden pregnancy. I didn't realize that it was like hidden, and you're living with your parents and they don't find out until you have a baby. Right. That is crazy. So yeah, mind over matter must be a real thing. I mean, I don't know how you're able to suck it in that much over 9 months. That's amazing.
I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, how did that change the dynamic in your family? Like, I just can only imagine as a parent finding that out when your daughter's in the hospital with a baby.
Right. Oh, yeah. It was a lot of emotion. My parents felt terrible that they didn't know. My mom was like, how did I not know? And I was like, well, you're the first person on the list of people that I made sure you didn't know. It was very strategic. But my family, as they all found out, like another older sister came to help me in the hospital. And as we started to tell all my siblings and everything that was going on, like there was just a huge outpouring of love. And they were so sad that I didn't feel like I could tell them, and that they thought I wouldn't have support from them. And for me, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't think they would support me, but I also felt like it was a very personal responsibility for me to take care of everything. And I didn't want to burden anyone. And, my mom, it took a long time for her to really process it, because by the time, she's in the picture, like just as quickly as the baby was born, and the nurse was talking to me about, this is so exciting. What are you going to name the baby? And I'm like in a daze, and I'm like, this is not my baby. I can't keep this baby. And she's like, oh, so are you placing her for adoption? I was like, huh? Wait, tell me more about adoption. That sounds great. Like, I just was such an overwhelm of things, and then I suddenly knew that was why it had to work that way, because even in later conversations, my mom's like, man, if I had known, she's like, there's no way I would have even, it would have crossed my mind to think of adoption. I would have just thought, well, you're just going to live with me and we'll just make it work. And then my boyfriend wanted to just get married and live in his parents' basement and just keep the baby. And I'm like if other people had gotten their hands in it, I feel like I may have been too impressionable and wanting to be, I made a mistake and I better do what these people tell me. And surely they know better than I do. So I feel like it had to happen that way so that I could make that choice on my own and feel really confident that that was absolutely the right choice without any other outside influences. So, but total love from my family, and they've always been very supportive.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. Your thoughts on adoption and on how that had to happen. I think that, we hear a lot. I remember a while back, years ago, I was watching the news, and one of the news anchors on, it was Channel 11. She, I think her name's Jillian. I can't remember her last name, but anyway, she was given up for adoption as a baby, and her take on it was almost like bitter. And I was really surprised by that, because I don't know, every adoption story that I've heard has been a story of gratitude. Like, oh, I'm so, I gave up my baby for adoption so that they would have a better life. Or I hear from the parents, we're so grateful. We wanted a child so bad, and now we're able to have a child. And even the children who I know and those that have been adopted, same kind of thing, mostly gratitude, but a different angle there. And I'm glad to hear, this angle of this is how it was supposed to be. So you still feel good, like that was the right decision. Were you worried about other people's opinion about that decision?
Not really. Honestly, I think I was in so much of a daze about it, although I didn't really talk about it unless I felt like my story could help someone. So I didn't really continue to hide it. Although some people were like, oh, we never knew. Or some people did find out. And then they're like, you never talked to us about it. And I was like, well, it was like a very personal experience, and I really don't want to hear what people think, because it's really none of their business. And I didn't want to deny what I felt in my heart and the things that I definitely knew were right. And the way that my adoption all worked out, there's no way it was not meant to be in my case. And I know I'm not always the most positive experience on every side, and there's definitely lots of opinions, but I absolutely know that it filled a void for the parents that couldn't have children of their own. I mean, for me, it absolutely made sense. So I don't open myself up, or hadn't until I wrote this stinking book. But over the years, I wouldn't really open myself up to allowing that feedback. Like in the church respect, like, because I was an active member, and there's a process of like, well, you shouldn't have had sex before marriage, and so I had to deal with some of the things with the bishop of my church, and some of those things where I did still feel like there was a lot of guilt and some shame that was sort of still looming. And so I was kind of like apologizing for making those choices with my boyfriend, but at the same time I was like, there's no way I can feel bad about being a literal tool, in my opinion, a tool in God's hands to bring a baby to earth that completed this family. And so I felt really torn. And so I really kept a lot of it to myself. But certainly when people they don't even understand the whole scope of how and why things happen. So I think for me, it really actually made me understand why our individual stories are so special and unique, and to not ever jump to conclusions on judgment myself. Like, I recognize I judge. We all get judgy about things, but I feel like my biggest blessing from that experience is that when something happens, I just assume there's so much more to it that I don't know. And so I just learned really to love and respect people for the decisions they are making. It's probably the very best that they know how to make a decision, and lots of very profound lessons that I learned at a young age. But I really try not to let other people's opinions that still spew out like affect me for too long. I let them affect me a little bit just because I want to connect with humans. But I don't know. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, no, and that's really good. I think that that's great. And like you said, I mean, I like the whole takeaway about judgment, because that's really, for all of us, we don't know everyone's story. And also God works in mysterious ways, right? He knew what was going to happen and how this other family was going to become complete, like you said. So that's cool. Yeah. Well, so your pregnancy is hidden the whole time. And then it's kind of at that point on a need to know basis. If someone needs to know, then you share it. And then many years later, I think 17 years later, you write a book and tell everybody this story. So tell me why you wrote that book and what you hope people will learn from you sharing that experience.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I definitely, I had reconnected a little more. So my adoption was semi-open, which at the time choices were either closed or semi-open. Wide open, how everything is nowadays, it was not very common when I placed. But basically my connection with my birth daughter was like just a letter and pictures each year. And then in these most recent years, I connected with her adoptive mother. And she was like, can we just bypass having to go through the social services, and let's just we feel comfortable being connected a little bit closer. And she had been feeling really strongly that she needed to help facilitate positive stories of adoption. And I was like, oh no, I've been feeling the same thing. So we reconnected and just started talking about how can we do that and do our part, because I didn't really necessarily want to share my story, other than I knew if it happened to me, certainly things were happening to other women. There's tons and tons of unplanned pregnancies, obviously, that are happening all the time. And for me, I just really felt very strongly that sharing our story and getting at the full angle. So my book has obviously my perspective, but there's also some excerpts from my birth daughter and from my mother and from the adoptive parents that kind of show the full circle of how adoption facilitates this master plan. And so we really felt like, okay, let's move forward. And I told her I did feel like, okay, I could probably write this into a book. I like writing. Let's see what happens. And then really the purpose, though, wasn't necessarily be like, okay, now it's like an expose. Here's everything that I did, guys. Although, my high school friends, of course, some of them want to interpret it that way, but it was really like, what can I do to create a tool that is going to be helpful for someone that's currently in this situation, whether they're choosing adoption or just faced with an unplanned pregnancy in general. And so the angle of it, which I get some criticism from people who are close to me, because some of them are like, well, you left out certain details, or maybe I didn't remember things the same way as someone else. But the purpose of it truly was to be a resource for people with unplanned pregnancies right now, and to be able to understand how those types of things, whether it is an unplanned pregnancy or another challenge people might experience, how we can embrace it and use it as something that influences us to make positive choices and to help other people. So really it became just a duty to feel like I needed to pick the elements that were going to be positive, but also showed kind of the challenges that were involved. And there is some stuff about judgment in there as well. But it was kind of like an aha moment too for me to be like, oh, that's why I got into comedy. Is for me, that's like kind of my personal therapy and whatever, like embracing talents and sharing things with the world still. But kind of just bringing it to full circle. Like when I knew that was what I was going to do, I was like, I really didn't want to do it because it was actually kind of a financial burden for me to publish a book. Pretty time consuming, and have a young family. And so taking time to do that. And then I found out I was pregnant again. And so there was sort of a sense of urgency, but I just knew that I needed to take the pieces of it that could be helpful in guiding someone else's decision, and not to push someone that adoption is always the answer, but for people to recognize that when you're faced with that, there's 3 decisions. There's either keep the baby, place the baby for adoption, or terminate the pregnancy. And those are all permanent decisions. And so for me, I feel like it was really important that I express how important it is for someone to understand. That woman needs to understand that it's her choice. Ultimately, she's the one that has to live with it. No matter which of those 3 decisions she makes, it's going to be with her the rest of her life. And it affects not only her, but it affects a lot of people. And so I wanted to just put as much emphasis on all of that as I could into one little kind of a resource.
That's great. I can tell. I mean, even just hearing you talk about it, it's a very, a heartfelt book that really, you poured your soul and your experience into. And I have not read it yet, but I did read the intro, and it was very well written and very intriguing. Like, as I read it, I just found myself wanting to know more. And I think that, like you said, we can all learn from it, because whether we're in that situation or not, we know someone who adoption has touched their lives, or unwanted pregnancy. And so there's definitely, even if it just helps us in our judgment, it helps with our mindset to have kind of a different perspective. So totally. That is really a good resource for everyone, not just people dealing, specifically with that issue. But you touched on comedy. I want to talk a little bit more about the role that comedy plays in your life and why you turn to comedy, how you use it personally, and feel free to talk a little more about your career and what you've done with it professionally also.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, I've always been like the goofball, the person that people know I'm just going to be the one that makes people laugh. And I love it because it makes people feel good. Like I've never met a person that after we have a good laugh that they're like, oh boy, that was terrible. I don't want to, I didn't need that. But we know that laughter feels great, and it's such a connecting tool. And I just know that when I was first introduced formally to improv, which was the first comedy art that I was introduced about 12 years ago by my brother, that same brother I work with. And I just had fun playing. I would go and I would play with a dozen other adults that we all had these different backgrounds and different jobs and different family status. And we would just put all that aside and we would just play for a couple hours at a time. And it was so good for having that outlet, having that mental stimuli, and really being able to learn to trust people, because there's rules within the scope of comedy, and especially within improvisation. It's a very positive environment, and it's very much, the root of it is yes, and that's the core principle of improv. Yes, meaning we're taking what we're given. This is either the suggestion from the audience that we're going to play with, or it's the idea that's presented at work, or it's whatever is presented with us. That's yes, is acknowledging it, and is where we get to run with it. We get to add our own ideas, our own input, and it moves it forward. We're not saying, but well, like there's nothing that's blocking it. So recognizing that not only was it a really fun creative outlet, and then of course when you trust people and you rely on making each other look good in that type of environment, that's why improv comedy is funny, is because we're focusing on the relationships and we are presenting something for the audience that people can relate to. And so that's where the laughter comes, is just from that natural desire to connect with other people. So that's really where it started, because I stumbled into it. Thank you to my brother. And then I started to see how it was changing me in my workplace. I was a branch manager of a bank at the time. And so I just noticed how it was enhancing my listening skills. It was keeping me in a positive mindset when I had, the same boring goals to meet each month, and trying to help energize my team by remembering to make them look good and celebrate their ideas and accomplishments. And so that's where a lot of transition started to happen, as I was like, oh, having comedy in my life as a hobby is really making me feel like a better version of myself. And then a stand-up I added into the mix because I just realized that was a different beast. It's like a little more cynical sometimes, or traditionally is recognized as such. And sometimes people think stand-up is just all raunchy and gross, and mine isn't. Everybody wants to laugh, but a lot of those things that connect us are those, things that everybody knows about, or dumb mistakes we've made, or people that joke about the crap they've gone through. People laugh because they can relate. You nudge your buddy and you're laughing because you're like, yeah, we know what he's talking about. But it really is so much more powerful than just an entertainment style. So I didn't even realize it until I was writing my book about it. And I was like, oh, this is something that, to me, comedy has really saved my life. It's helped me get through my problems. It's helped me to respect other people. It's helped me to be a better listener. It's helped me to be a more patient mother. It's helped me be a better human. And so then bringing it around, like, that's what I feel like those are my talents that I'm super lucky to have been blessed with. And so when I get to teach people about it and either perform for people and just let people laugh at my shows, or bring people in and do comedy workshops, or improv workshops rather, they get worried. They're like, oh, I'm not funny. I have to be in a scene. It's like, no, it's not really like that. I'm going to teach you these skills that you're making stuff up every day. Nobody plans every conversation, and you don't know exactly how your day is going to go. But if you can heighten your own awareness of how to interact with other people, you can also be a positive interaction in someone else's life. And those connections allow us to build better relationships. And then the humor just naturally comes when you're with people you're comfortable with. And you, again, it's about trust and just feeling safe being who you are and showing up as your best self and never hurting other people's feelings for being their best self. It's just a magical tool. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely feel like I get diarrhea of the mouth about it, because it seems like, oh, my job is so fun. I just get to go laugh and play, which is true. But also I get real feedback from people that are like, oh, I was on just last week. Someone was like, I was on a sales call and it wasn't going very well. And then I remembered some of the things we talked about in the workshop. And so I don't know exactly how the conversation transpired, but she was like, I switched my mindset and I kept it in this really positive realm. And then the conversation ended really great. And then she shared it with her whole sales team. And so they were like, oh, it works. And so it's like, we're just trying to be better humans, really, and have fun with it.
I love it. I love how you've been able to use that, in your whole life, because I think that we get that. We get how laughter connects us, on a certain level, but then you're bringing that to the next level. And so that's really powerful. That's a really powerful tool. So that was you hit on this a little, but that's, as you were talking, what I was going to ask. So people come to your improv workshops and they're like, I'm here, but I'm not funny. Like, you get that?
Yes.
Okay. Because
always.
that would be as I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking, oh, that would be really a cool thing to learn. But I would be so held back by the fact that I would be like, oh my gosh, but I'm not funny. This sounds fun, but I'm not going to be funny. So how do you give us a little sneak peek when people are there, how you get them out of themselves enough to open up and to try this new skill of improv?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I always commend them for taking the risk to try something new. I know it's really scary for some people, but really that's what drives us to do things that are new and sometimes scary, is the fear of the unknown. So I really quickly will engage them in very simple interactive activities that, in fact, the name of my company, Zip Zap Zop, is based off of an improv activity called Zip Zap Zop, which is super, super basic connecting activity of passing around these words in a circle. And you have to connect with people by making eye contact and by pointing, and you pass around the word zip, and then that person turns to someone else and passes zap, and then they turn to someone else and they pass zop, and it goes around and around, and everybody's like nervous and sweating and focused, and they're like, they came in thinking they have to be funny, but then we just say, don't worry about that. We're not worried about being funny. We're just here to have fun. And then within, 90 seconds is about the time frame of once we start that first activity, just to warm them up, somebody will accidentally say zip and then zip again instead of zip zap. And so then everyone's like, oh, oops. Like, there's suddenly these funny little ways that immediately people go, oh, okay, this isn't about hurrying up and having this funny punchline. We're just trying to break the ice and recognize that we're all just here. Like, we're all, I don't know. I wish there was this really profound way of explaining it, but I just tell them they don't have to be funny and to not worry about that. We're just here to try something new and to take the risk. And then they see immediately that it's very low risk. It's a very safe place to be themselves, and very simple instructions that immediately open the door for them to go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not having to hurry up and tell a joke. And so they'll just be on board. And I would seriously say about 90 seconds is average, that everyone, you can feel the tension has melted away. People realize we're just going to goof around. And then everyone realizes, oh, we're laughing just because we're here in the collective trying something unique. We're not telling these funny jokes. And then naturally, as the activities get more creative and stretch their minds with brainstorming things and pun exercises or, wordplay, things like that, then it starts to just show us really what people can bring to the table, and different mindsets that we all have. But it's just, immediately I just tell them, you don't have to be funny. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to just create new things with whatever is in your mind, and whatever you have in your mind is totally good enough.
That's awesome. Well, that sounds like so much fun. I, before this call, I would have never thought that would be something I would want to do. So I'm coming around. I think that sounds like something that would be a lot of fun. And that's sounding like, that could be a fun, I don't know if you do single classes or if they're like a series of classes, but like a fun date night or
I've done couples events.
That would be awesome.
And it's great to do different types of activities. It's similar concepts, but it's super fun to do couples workshops.
I bet. Because you can really, with certain couples, you can really be yourself. And okay, very fun. Well, tell people we're about out of time. Tell people where they can get more information about your book and your vlog and all the work that you do.
Cool. Yeah. The best place to find all things Megan Bryant is at my website, which is meetmeganbryant.com. And there's just links to all of the things, the comedy festival I run, my improv trainings, and my book. All those have just links right on the front page. And, but really, sometimes people are just like, just tell people to Google you. Because if you Google Megan Bryant Boise, like a ton of stuff comes up because I'm in Boise, Idaho. So anyway, but yeah, I always have lots of different things going on. And then the book, of course, is anywhere you can buy a book. It's on pretty much any website for Kindle versions, and in some bookstores. And I sign copies and ship them out so people can just email me. I'm very easy to find.
Okay, cool. And I will link to your book and your website in the show notes. It's been a lot of fun to talk to you. And I think that we've all learned a lot. And new goal for me is to go learn some improv. Sounds like a lot of fun. So awesome. I hope that some of our listeners are feeling the same, like, hey, maybe this is something that would add, something new to my life and could be a lot of fun. And I appreciate all the takeaways too about your pregnancy, and appreciate you, opening up and sharing that. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for listening. We will see you next time on Moms Who Know. Subscribe to Moms Who Know so you never miss an episode, and join the conversation on Facebook at facebook.com/Moms Who Know podcast.